Good morning. Please be seated. And welcome everyone that's joining us today online. I'll admit, today's gospel reading was a strange one for me to read and hear. Mark's gospel is largely focused on the life of Jesus. Almost every chapter in Mark's gospel is devoted to Jesus as the primary subject. So why is a large section of chapter 6 focusing on the death of John the Baptist at the hands of Herod? Was Mark looking to change things up? Did he want to call attention to King Herod? Did he dislike Herod's wife? Probably. Or is there more to the story than what we see at first glance? The story tells of what became of John the Baptist. John was a great prophet who came before Jesus and foretold what Jesus would be. Yet John got into trouble with King Herod, even though the king looked up to John, intrigued by what John had been saying. And when the king took his brother's wife as his own wife, John told him that was wrong. And this statement by John really upset Herod's wife, as you can imagine. And she hated John the Baptist and wanted him dead. So King Herod had John put in prison for these statements because he feared John, because John was such a holy man, and he enjoyed talking to John and hearing John speak of Jesus and what was to come. But then the story all of a sudden takes a dark turn when at a banquet wherein his leaders and his court were present, he made a bold promise to his daughter that he would give her whatever she asked of him. And the daughter asked her mother, who of course said, "Ask for John the Baptist's head on a platter." And King Herod agreed and carried out that request. He didn't want to lose face, and he had John beheaded. It's quite the stark difference between this and Mark's telling of Jesus' compassion, healing, miracles, and teaching. So what might Mark have been hinting at when he wrote this? The parallels between John the Baptist's life and Jesus's are striking. Both had a new message for the world. Both were persecuted by the politicians of the day, and both would be put to death at the hands of the governing bodies in place. Mark may have chosen to tell this story in detail as a way of foreshadowing the life and death of Jesus. Additionally, he chose to write this portion of the gospel between the story of the commissioning of the disciples and the return of the disciples, possibly as a way to show the expansion of the Jesus movement. And we can see that even in today's reading, where it said in the beginning where everyone was talking about Jesus. So again, foreshadowing this movement that Jesus had started, and also highlighting the power of truth from John and also its dangers. But as interesting as it is to examine the reasons why Mark may have written this passage, I'm often more drawn as to what a gospel reading may mean for our world and our lives today. What can we take away from today's reading? In other words, what is the good news in this gospel reading? And I'll be honest, when Father Ron asked me to give today's reflection and I read the gospel reading, I was a little concerned, because how do you find good news out of a story where John the Baptist is imprisoned and then beheaded? I was at a loss. It took a little bit of time, but I think I might have got there. There are few themes that are applicable in today's society. King Herod had made a bold statement in front of his followers and contemporaries. Think of many of our politicians or leaders today, that when confronted with its reality, he chose to double down instead of lose face or reverse course. And this choice had disastrous consequences, not only obviously for John the Baptist, but also for King Herod, who later in Mark's gospel, the translation of how he was haunted was that he was deeply grieved by John's death. And we can draw parallels to today's politicians that often continue to support a stance or a statement, even when faced with facts and information that directly contradict that position, or that they adopt the position that has disastrous consequences, yet continue down that same path. But for me, not being a politician, the idea of someone I know telling me a hard truth, like John had told King Herod, that I may not necessarily agree with or want to acknowledge, is something I can relate to. Have you ever had that person in your life or a friend that always tells you when you're doing something wrong, or be willing to cut to the heart of the matter? Well, I have, and it can be uncomfortable to say the least. Sometimes it may make you angry. It makes me angry Or for me, the tendency may be to shoot the messenger instead of taking a long, hard look at my actions or my words. Fear and anger can cause us to do and say things we normally wouldn't. It can put us in an awkward situation, one where it's hard to back out of without losing face or having to apologize. Yet the message of John the Baptist was an example of what it means to tell the truth, even when faced with severe consequences. But it's not just a story of a wild man that's in the wilderness eating bugs, spouting out these random predictions. John always pointed beyond himself to Jesus and what was to come. He looked to Jesus' love and compassion and used that as his source of strength to help make the world a better place. Might we also draw on the strength of Jesus' love and compassion and use that to seek truth and goodness for our neighbors and for our planet, to point beyond ourselves to Jesus and imitate that care for others, to love as God and Jesus love us. And when I look at the gospel story in that light, it changes the theme from one of pain and death to a story of freedom and leaning on Jesus to do what is right, even when it's not the popular thing to do. And for me, this is what the good news of the Bible is all about. Amen.